am John Ricasino, the first reporter in this chapter titled Corporate Strategy, Vertical Integration, and Diversification. On September 7, 2001, Jeffrey Immelt was appointed Chairman and CEO of General Electric or GE. Since then, the external environment has undergone continuous and dramatic change, beginning with the social and economic consequences of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and continuing with the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis. Despite the fact that GE is a diverse conglomerate with operations in many industries and markets, the 2001 recession and the even deeper recession of 2008 to 2009 were particularly difficult for the company. One reason was the financial hit that GE Capital took, as that unit accounted for more than half of GE's profits. GE's share price fell 84% in a critical 17-month period, from $42.12 on October 2, 2007 to $6.66 on March 5, 2009, resulting in a $378 billion loss in shareholder value. To make matters worse, GE lost its AAA credit rating, and the company was forced to seek a $15 billion liquidity injection from legendary investors Warren Buffett. Between 2008 and 2013, GE underperformed the Dow Jones Industrial Average significantly. Mr. Immelt recognized the need for change. GE's 5 business units, including technology infrastructure, energy infrastructure, capital finance, consumer and industrial, and NBC Universal, generated $157 billion in revenue in 2009. More than half of those revenues were generated outside of the United States, and GE employed over 300,000 people in over 100 countries. Mr. Immelt made decision to refocus GE's portfolio of businesses in order to reduce its exposure to capital markets and achieve reliable and sustainable future growth by leveraging the company's core competencies in industrial engineering. GE sold NBC Universal to Comcast, the largest cable operator in the United States, and also listed its century-old appliance division for sale. GE had previously identified clean technology and more recently healthcare as major future growth industries. GE launched 2 strategic initiatives to capitalize on these opportunities: Eco-Imagination and Health Imagination. Eco-Imagination is GE's clean tech strategic initiative, which was launched in 2005 and was renewed in 2010 with an additional $10 billion in investment. According to Mr. Immelt, the company's strategic intent is to focus our unique energy, technology, manufacturing, and infrastructure capabilities to develop tomorrow's solutions such as solar energy, hybrid locomotives, fuel cells, lower emission aircraft engines, lighter and strong materials, efficient in lighting and water purification technology. Health Imagination. GE's newest strategic initiative was launched in 2009. Its goal is to improve healthcare quality and access while lowering costs. GE's strategic intent is to invest $6 billion by 2015 in order to reduce healthcare costs by 15% and increase access to essential healthcare services. By streamlining healthcare procedures, processes, and standards, we can increase global service by 15%, reach at least 100 million people per year, and improve healthcare quality by 15%. These 2 strategic initiatives are tools used by GE's top executives to drive change within their language multinational corporation. Mr. Immelt in particular hopes that the 2 new strategic initiatives will not only position GE to capitalize on opportunities in future industries, but will also help the company to grow. The key questions of where and how to compete are at the heart of strategy formulation. Business strategy is concerned with how to compete in a single product market. As discussed in Chapter 6, firms can pursue one of 2 generic business strategies in their pursuit of competitive advantage, like in increased differentiation or lower cost differentiation. Some firms may be able to pursue an integration strategy by increasing differentiation and lowering costs if trade-offs can be reconciled. Another is firms frequently expand their business activities as they grow by seeking out new markets offering new products and services, and competing in different geographies. When this occurs, managers must develop a corporate strategy. To gain and maintain a competitive advantages, any corporate strategy must align with and strengthen a company's business strategy, whether differentiation, cost leadership, or an integration strategy. What is corporate strategy? Corporate strategy is something to do that takes a portfolio approach to strategic decision making by looking across all of a firm's businesses to determine how to create the most value. In order to develop a corporate strategy, firms must look at how the various businesses they own fit together, how they impact each other, and how the parent company is structured in order to optimize human capital, processes, and governance. Corporate strategy builds on top of business strategy, which is concerned with the decision making for an individual business. Executives must decide in number 1, in what stages of the industry value chain to participate. The transformation of raw materials into finished goods and services is described by the industry value chain, which is divided into vertical stages. The vertical integration of the company is determined by this decision. Number 2, what range of products and services to offer. The level of diversification of the company is determined by this decision. And number 3, where to compete in terms of regional, national, or international markets. The geographic scope of the company is determined by this type of decision. Although many managers have input into this critical decision-making process, the CEO is ultimately responsible for corporate strategy. For example, we discussed GE CEO Immel's attempt to refocus the conglomerate on future growth industries through the Eco-Imagination and Health Imagination strategic initiatives in chapter case number 8. Underlying strategic management concepts that will guide our decisions of vertical integration, diversification, and geographic competition. Number 1 is the core competencies. These are distinct strengths buried deep within a company. It enables a company to differentiate its product and services from those of its competitors, resulting in higher customer value or lower costs for comparable products and services. A firm's boundaries according to the resource-based view of the firm, these are defined by its knowledge bases and competencies. The second one is the economies of scale. It refers to the cost advantage gained by a company as its output level rises. Because of the inverse relationship between per unit fixed cost and quantity produced, the advantage arises. The lower the per unit fixed cost, the greater the quantity of output produced. With an increase in output, it also resulted in a decrease in average variable costs. And operational efficiencies and synergies as a result of increased production scale are responsible for this. Number 3 is economies of scope. Economies of scope, on the other hand, are cost saving resulting from producing 2 or more outputs or providing different services at a lower cost than if they were produced separately using the same resources and technology. Is transaction costs. All costs associated with an economic exchange are referred to as transaction costs. The concept is based on transaction cost economics, a strategic management framework that allows managers to determine whether expanding their company's boundaries through vertical integration or diversification is cost-effective.
Now, let's talk about the boundaries of the firm. So, determining the boundaries of the firm so that it is more likely to gain and sustain a competitive advantage is the critical challenge in corporate strategy. A theoretical framework in strategic management called transaction cost economics explains and predicts the boundaries of the firm. Insights gained from transaction cost economics helps managers decide what activities to do in-house versus what services and products to obtain from the external market. So this stream of research was first initiated by Nobel laureate Ronald Coase, who asked a fundamental question: given the efficiencies of free markets, why do firms even exist? The key insight of transaction cost economics is that different institutional arrangements, markets versus firms, have different costs attached. To start, we need to identify transaction costs. These are all internal and external costs associated with an economic exchange. whether it takes place within the boundaries of a firm or in markets. Exhibit 8.1 visualizes the notion of transaction costs. It shows the respective internal transaction cost within Firm A and Firm B, as well as the external transactions that occur when Firm A and Firm B do business with one another. The total cost of transacting consists of external and internal transaction costs as follows. When companies transact in the open market, they incur external transaction cost, the cost of searching for a firm or an individual with whom to contract, and then negotiating, monitoring, and enforcing the contract. Next is transaction cost can occur within the firm as well. Considered internal transaction cost, these include costs pertaining to organizing an economic exchange within a firm. For example, the cost of recruiting and retaining employees, paying salaries and benefits, setting up a shop floor, providing office space and computers, organizing, monitoring, and supervising work. Internal transaction costs also include administrative costs associated with coordinating economic activity between different business units of the same corporation, such as transfer pricing for input factors and between business units and corporate headquarters, including important decisions pertaining to resource allocation, among others. Internal transaction costs tend to increase with organizational size and complexity. Firms versus markets. Make or buy. Transaction cost economics allows us to explain which activities a firm should pursue in-house or make versus which goods and services to obtain externally or buy. These decisions help determine the boundaries of the firm. In some cases, cost of using the markers such as search costs, negotiating and drafting contracts, monitoring and enforcing contracts when necessary may be higher than integrating the activity within a single firm and coordinating it through an organizational hierarchy. When the cost of pursuing an activity in-house are less than the cases of transacting for that activity in the marker, then the firm should vertically integrate by owning production of the needed inputs of the channels for the distribution of outputs. In other words, when firms are more efficient in organizing economic activity than in markets, which rely on contracts among many independent actors, firms should vertically integrate. For example, rather than contracting in the open market for individual pieces of software code, Google hires programmers to write code in-house. Owning these software development capabilities is valuable to the firm because it costs such as salaries and employee benefits to in-house computer programmers. Computer programmers are less than what they would be in the open market. More importantly, Google gains economic of scope in software development resources and capabilities, and reduces the monitoring costs. This is because skills acquired in writing software code for its different internet-based service offerings are transferable to new offerings. Programmers working on the original proprietary software code for the Google search engine leverage these skills in creating a highly profitable online advertising business. Although some of Google's software products are open source, such as the Android operating system, many of the company's internet services are based on closely guarded and proprietary software code. Google, like many leading high-tech companies such as Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft, relies on proprietary software code and algorithms because using the open market to transact for individual pieces of software would be prohibitively expensive. Also, the firms would need to disclose the underlying software code to outside developers, thus negating the value creation potential. Firms and markets, as different institutional arrangements for organizing economic activity, have their own distinct advantages and disadvantages. As summarized in Exhibit 8.2, the advantages of firms include the ability to make command and control decisions by fiat along clear hierarchical lines of authority, coordination of highly complex tasks to allow for a specialized division of labor, transaction-specific investments such as specialized robotics equipments that is highly valuable within the firm but of little or no use in the external market, and creation of a community of knowledge. While its disadvantages of organizing economic activity includes administrative costs because of necessary bureaucracy, low-powered incentives such as hourly wages and salaries. These often are less attractive motivators than the entrepreneurial opportunities and rewards that can be obtained in the open market. And lastly is the principal agent problem. The principal agent problem is a major disadvantage of organizing economic activity within firms. As opposed to within markets, it can arise when an agent such as manager performing activities on behalf of the principal. Indeed, the separation of ownership and control is one of the hallmarks of a publicly traded company, and so some degree of principal-agent problem is almost inevitable. For example, a manager may pursue his own interests such as job security and managerial perks that conflict with the principal goals, in particular, creating shareholder value. And one potential way to overcome the principal agent problem is to give stock options to managers, thus making them owners. While the advantages of markets include high-powered incentives and the increase on flexibility. High-powered incentives, for example, an individual can start a new venture offering specialized software. High-powered incentives of the open market include the entrepreneur's ability to capture the venture's profit, to take a new venture through an initial public offering, or to be acquired by an existing firm. In this so-called liquidity event, a successful entrepreneur can make potentially enough money to provide financial security for life. And next is the increase on flexibility. Transacting in markets enables those who wish to purchase goods to compare prices and services among many different providers. While its disadvantages include search cost, opportunism by other parties, incomplete contracting, and enforcement of contracts. On a very fundamental level, perhaps the biggest disadvantage of transacting in markets, rather than owning the various production and distribution activities within the firm itself, entails non-trivial search costs. In particular, a firm faces search costs when it must scour the market to find reliable suppliers from among the many firms competing to offer similar products and services. Even more difficult can be the search to find suppliers when the specific products and services needed are not offered at all many firms currently in the market. In this case, production of supplies would require transaction-specific investments, an advantage of firms. Next is the opportunism by other parties. Opportunism is behavior characterized by self-interest seeking with guile. And we'll discuss this in more detail later. But let's proceed now in incomplete contracting. Although market transactions are based on implicit and explicit contracts, all contracts are incomplete to some extent because not all future contingencies can be anticipated at the time of contracting. It is also difficult to specify expectations such as what stipulates acceptable quality in a graphic design project, or to measure performance and outcomes such as what does excess wear and tear mean when returning a lease car. Another serious hazard inherent in contracting is information asymmetry, which we discuss next. And lastly is the enforcement of contracts. It is often difficult, costly, and time-consuming to enforce legal contracts. Not only does litigation absorb a significant amount of managerial resources and attention, but it can easily amount to several $1 million in legal fees. Legal exposure is one of the major hazards in using markets rather than integrating an activity within a firm's hierarchy. Frequently, sellers have better information about products and services than buyers, which in turn creates information asymmetries, situations in which one party is more informed than another because of the possession of private information. When firms transact in the market, such an unequal information can lead to a lemons problem. And Nobel laureate George Akerlof first described this situation using the market for used cars as an example. Assume only two types of cars are sold, good cars and bad cars, to be called as lemons. Good cars are worth $8,000 and bad ones are worth $4,000. Moreover, only the seller knows whether a car is good or is a lemon, assuming the market supply is split equally between good and bad cars. The probability of buying a lemon is 50%. Buyers are aware of the general possibility of buying a lemon and this would like to hedge against it. Therefore, they split the difference and offer $6,000 for a used car. This discounting strategy has the perverse effect of providing out all the good cars because the sellers perceive their value to be above $6,000. Assuming that to be that case, all used cars offered for sale will be lemons. The important takeaway here is the caveat emptor or buyer beware. Information asymmetries can result in the crowding out of desirable goods and services by inferior ones. This has been shown to be true in many markets, not just for used cars but also in e-commerce such as eBay, mortgage-backed securities, and even collaborative R&D projects. Alternatives on the make or buy continuum. The make and buy choices anchor each end of a continuum from markets to firms. And as depicted in Exhibit 8.3, several alternative hybrid arrangements are in fact available between these two extremes, moving from transacting in the market or buy to full integration make. Alternatives include short-term contracts as well as various forms of strategic alliances such as long-term contracts, equity alliances, and joint ventures. And last is the parent-subsidiary relationships. When engaging in short-term contracting, a firm sends out requests for proposals to several companies, which initiates competitive bidding for contracts to be awarded with a short duration, generally less than 1 year. The benefit to this approach lies in the fact that it allows a somewhat longer planning period than individual market transactions. Moreover, the buying firm can often demand lower prices due to the competitive bidding process. The drawback, however, is that firms responding to the RFP have no incentive to make any transaction-specific investments, such as to buy new machinery to improve product quality due to the short duration of the contract. This is exactly what happened in the US automotive industry when GM used short-term contracts for standard car components to reduce costs. When faced with significant cost pressures, suppliers reduced component quality in order to protect their crowding margins. This resulted in lower quality GM cars, contributing to a competitive advantage vis-a-vis competitors, most notably Toyota, but also Ford, which use a more cooperative, longer-term partnering approach with their suppliers. And as we move toward greater integration on the make or buy continuum, the next organizational forms are strategic alliances. Strategic alliances are voluntary arrangements between firms that involve the sharing of knowledge, resources, and capabilities with the intent of developing processes, products, or services to lead to competitive advantages. Alliances have become a ubiquitous phenomenon, especially in high-tech industries. Moreover, strategic alliances can facilitate investments in transaction-specific assets without encountering the internal transaction cost involved in owning firms in various stages of the industry value chain. Strategic alliances is an umbrella term that denotes different hybrid organizational forms among them: long-term contracts, equity alliances, and joint ventures. Given their prevalence in today's competitive landscape as a key vehicle to execute a firm's corporate strategy, we take a quick look at strategic alliances here and then study them in more depth in Chapter 9. The long-term contracts. We noted that firms in short-term contracts have no incentive to make transaction-specific investments. Long-term contracts, which work much like short-term contracts, but with a duration generally greater than 1 year, help overcome this drawback. Long-term contracts help facilitate transaction-specific investments. Licensing, for example, is a form of long-term contracting in the manufacturing sector that enables firms to commercialize intellectual property such as a patent. The first biotechnology drug to reach the market, Humulin or human insulin was developed by Genentech and commercialized by Eli Lilly based on a licensing agreement. Another type of long-term contracting is the franchising. Franchising is a long-term contract in which a franchisor grants a franchisee the right to use the franchisor's trademark and business processes to offer goods and services that carry the franchisor's brand name. Next is the equity alliances. Yet another form of strategic alliance is an equity alliance. Equity alliance is a partnership in which at least one partner takes partial ownership in the other partner. A partner purchases an ownership share by buying stock, and thus making an equity investment. The taking of equity tends to signal greater commitment to the partnership. Strategy Highlight 8.1 describes an equity alliance between Toyota and Orocobre Ltd, an Australian mineral resource company, to facilitate specialized investments for the exploration and mining of lithium, a critical input for lithium-ion batteries used in hybrid and electrical vehicles. In a contract arrangement, one transaction partner could attempt to hold up the other by demanding lower prices or threatening to walk away from the agreement altogether. To assuage Orocobre's concerns, Toyota made a credible commitment, a long-term strategic decision that is both difficult and costly to reverse. Alternatively, Toyota could have acquired Orocobre outright, thus engaging in backward vertical integration as well as in unrelated diversification. This would have been, however, a much more costly and riskier strategic move. Next is the joint ventures. In a joint venture, which is another special form of strategic alliance, two or more partners create and jointly own a new organization. Since the partners contribute equity to a joint venture, they make a long-term commitment, which in turn facilitates transaction-specific investments. Dow Corning, owned jointly by Dow Chemical and Corning, is an example of a joint venture. Dow Corning, which focuses on silicon-based technology, employs roughly 10,000 people and has 5 billion in annual revenues, which shows that some joint ventures can be quite large. Another example is Hulu, which offers web-based streaming video of TV shows and movies. Is also a joint venture owned by NBC, Fox, and Disney, with 3 million users in 2013. Hulu is a smaller competitor to Netflix with some 30 million users. Lastly, the parent-subsidiary relationship. The parent-subsidiary relationship describes the most integrated alternative to performing an activity within one's own corporate family. The corporate parent owns the subsidiary and can direct it via command and control. Transaction costs that arise are frequently due to political turf battles, which may include the capital budgeting process and transfer prices among other areas. For example, although GM owns its European car makers, Opel in Germany and Vauxhall in the United Kingdom, it had problems bringing some of their know-how and design of some small fuel-efficient cars back into the US. This failure put GM at a competitive disadvantage in the relation to the Japanese competitors when they were first entering the US market with more fuel-efficient cars. In addition, the Japanese car makers were able to improve the quality and design of their vehicles faster, which in turn enabled them to gain a competitive advantage, especially in an environment of rising gas prices. The GM versus Opel and Vauxhall parent-subsidiary relationship was burdened by political problems because managers in Detroit did not respect the engineering behind the small fuel-efficient cars that Opel and Vauxhall made. They were not very interested in using European know-how for the US market and didn't want to pay much or anything for it. Moreover, Detroit was tired of subsidizing the losses of Opel and Vauxhall and felt that its European subsidiaries were manipulating the capital budgeting process. In turn, the Opel and Vauxhall subsidiaries felt resentment toward their parent company. GM had initially planned to shut them down as part of its bankruptcy restructuring, whereas they instead hoped to be divested as independent companies. Having laid a strong theoretical foundation by fully considering transaction cost economics and the boundaries of the firm, we now turn our attention to the firm position along the vertical industry value chain.
Hi everyone! I'm here to discuss the continuation of our report, which is vertical integration 8.3 along industry. And vertical integration is where two businesses at different stages of the supply chain join together. For instance, a business that relies on another for its supplies may find that is unreliable, which is affecting businesses. In turn, it may vertically integrate with its supplier in order to reduce late deliveries and increase efficiencies. Business look to integrate in order to obtain the greater control of the supply chain. Suppliers needed buyers and buyers needed suppliers. Suppliers need, yet there is a competitive aspect involved. There is nothing to stop either the supplier or buyer from doing their business elsewhere. Vertically integrating, the suppliers no longer worries about having custom, and the buyer longer worries about unreliable services. We have Exhibit 8.4, backward and forward vertical integration along industry value chain. Stage 1 is the raw materials. Stage 2, component intermediate goods. Stage 3, final assembly manufacturing. Stage 4, marketing sales. Stage 5, after sales services and support. Let's take a look of our cell phone. Maybe the cell phone is the raw materials such as chemicals, ceramics, metals, oil for plastic, and so on are commodities. In each of these commodity business are different companies such as DuPont in US, BASF in Germany, Kyocera in Japan, and ExxonMobil in US. Intermediate goods and components such as integrated circuits, display, touchscreens, camera, batteries are provided by firms such as ARM Holdings in UK, Jabil Circuit in USA, Intel in USA, LG in Display in Korea, Altec in Taiwan, and BYD in China. Original equipment manufacturing firms OEM such as Plectronics in Singapore and Foxconn in China typically assemble cell phones under contract for consumer electronics and telecommunications companies such as BlackBerry, Canada, Ericsson, Sweden, Motorola in US, Nokia in Finland, Samsung in South Korea, and others. If you look closely at the iPhone, for example, you will notice it says designed by Apple in California, but assembled in China. Finally, to get wireless data and voice services, you pick a service provider such as AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon in the United States of America, Movil in Mexico, Oil in Brazil, Orange in France, T-Mobile or Vodafone in Germany, NTT, Docomo in Japan, Airtel in India, or China Mobile in China, among others. All of these companies, from raw materials, suppliers for these services providers, comprise the global industry value chain that as a whole delivers as you a working cell phone. Determined by their corporate strategy, each firm decides where in the industry value chain to participate. This term defines the vertical boundaries of the firm. Vertical integration is where companies at different stages at the supply chain join together from one company. There are three types of vertical integration: backward, forward, and balanced. Vertical integration allows the company to control the distribution or supply of its good, allowing its greater control and efficiency along the supply chain. At the same time, the combined companies benefits from the profits of companies. This can be effective allow it to offer lower prices to the final consumer. For instance, chocolate manufacturing has many stages of the supply chain, two of which are processing of cocoa beans and another two manufacturing the final chocolate bar. Vertical integration occurs when the chocolate manufacturer purchases a cocoa bean processor that is buying its beans from. As a result, the manufacturing can pay exactly the marginal cost rather than profiting the processor. In turn, consumers may see lower prices in competitive marketplace. Vertical integration examples is Amazon has vertically integrated much its businesses. Second is Carnegie Steel. Carnegie was a massive steel manufacturing in late 19th centuries. It's vertically integrated by acquiring companies before itself in the supply chain. Next is IKEA. IKEA is known as a flat pack retailer that sells mostly wooden furniture. Netflix is known as a provider for streaming services. With the end of supply chain, the direct interaction with the consumer. Zara is a Spanish clothing and accessory company that has over 1,000 stores worldwide. We have vertical integration. We have types of integration, which is forward, backward, and balance. Forward vertical integration is where one company mergers, acquires, or expand with the firms that is head of the supply chain. Forward vertical integration is one of the company's mergers, acquires, or expands with the firms that ahead of the supply chain. This most basic form, the supply chain contains the raw materials, extractors, or manufacturers, and retail distributions. We have backward vertical integration. Backward vertical integration is where a company joins with another that is a stage of before itself in the supply chain. In other words, it integrates with one of its suppliers. For instance, IKEA is dependent manufacturers of woods. When it integrates with the manufacturers, we see vertical integration. We have balanced integration. There is third type of integration. Balanced integration is quite simply a combination of backward and forward integration. For instance, balanced integration would be where company mergers with a company that before it is supply chain as well as one of this after. Next we have 8.5 figure, which is backward vertical integration and forward vertical integration. The upstream is the backward and the downstream is the forward vertical integration. Stage 1, we have design. Stage 2, manufacturing. Stage 3, we have marketing. Stage 4, after sales services and support. We have benefits of vertical integration. Lower costs, improves quality, facilitates scheduling and planning, secures critical supplies and distribution channels, facilitates investment in specialized assets. Lastly, if we have benefits, we have risk vertical integration. Increasing costs, reducing quality, reducing flexibility, increasing the legal repercussions. Higher degree vertical integration can lead increasing costs for a number of reasons. In-house suppliers tend to have higher cost structures because they are exposed into market competition. Knowing there will always be a buyer for their products reduces their incentives in the lower cost. In contrast, suppliers in the open market, because they serve as much larger market, it can be achieved economies of scale that include in-house suppliers. Organizational complexity increases with their level of vertical integration, such as increasing administrative costs, such as determining appropriate transfer prices between in-house supplier and buyer. Administrative costs are part of internal transactions costs and arise from coordination of multiple division, political maneuvering of resources, the consumption of company perks, and simply the employee lacking of the knowledge of that will be always be a buyer for their products, not only reduced incentives in-house suppliers to lower costs, but also reduce the incentive to increase quality to come up with the innovative new products. Moreover, given the larger scale of greater effects, the develop unique capabilities and quality improvement. Higher degree vertical integration also reduce affirmative strategic flexibility, especially when faced with changes in external environment like fluctuation in demand and technology change. We have alternative vertical integration. Proper integration is a way of orchestrating value activities in which a firm backwardly integrated but also relies on outside market firms for some of its supplies, or it's forwardly integrated but also relies on outside market supplies for some of its distribution. Tougher integration has benefits. It exposes how suppliers and distributions to market competition so that performance comparison are possible rather than hollowing on its competencies and relying too much outsourcing. Proper integration allows a firm retain and fine-tune in competencies in upstream and downstream value chain activity. Proper integration also enhances firm's flexibility demand. For example, when adjusting fluctuation in demand, a firm could cut back on the finished goods and delivers external retailer while continuing to stock on its own stores. Using proper integration, firms can combine internal external knowledge, possibly paving and path for innovation. Based on a study, 3,500 product introductions in the computer industry, researchers have provided empirical evidence that proper integration can be beneficial. Firms that pursued proper integration achieve superior performance in both innovation and financial performance when compared with firms that relied on vertical integration or strategic resourcing. Last one is a strategic outsourcing. Another alternative to vertical integration is a strategic outsourcing, which involves moving one or more internal value chain activities outside the firm boundaries to the firm's industry is value chain. A firm that engaged in strategic outsourcing reduces its level of vertical integrations rather than developing their own human resource management system. For instance, some firms outside the non-core activities for companies such as PeopleSoft, owned by Oracle, EDS, owned by HP, or Parrot Systems, owned by Dell, which can leverage their deep competencies to produce scale effects. In the popular media and everyday conversation, you may hear the term outsourcing used mean sending jobs out of the country. Actually, when outsourced activities take place outside home country, the correct term. offshoring. It's such offshoring or offshore outsourcing. But whatever name is huge phenomenon. For example, Infosys, one of the world's largest technology supplies companies and provides for IT services to many Fortune 1000 larger technology companies and provides IT services globally. The global offshoring market estimated to be $1.4 trillion and expected to grow compound annual growth rate in 15%. Banking and financial services, IT, and healthcare are the most active sectors such as offshoring offshoring outsourcing. Most recently, U.S. law began to offshore law and legal work such as drafting standard contracts and background research to India. We discuss global strategy in detail in chapter 10. That's all for my report. This is Angelica Perea. Thank you for listening.
Corporate diversification expanding beyond single market. Various general diversification strategies. First, let's define diversification. So, diversification is an increase in the variety of products and services a firm offers or markets and the geographic regions in which it competes. So, first, the product diversification strategy. It is a corporate strategy in which a firm is active in different product markets. Second, the geographic diversification strategy, and it is a corporate strategy in which a firm is active in several different countries. Third is the product market diversification strategy, wherein it is a corporate strategy in which a firm is active in several different product markets and several different countries. Types of corporate diversification. So, to understand the different types and degrees of corporate diversification, Richard Rumwelt developed a helpful classification scheme shown in 8.7. Exhibit 8.7. First, a single business firm derives 95% or more of its revenue from one business. Although Google is active in many different businesses, it obtains more than 95% of its revenue from online advertising. Second, a dominant business firm derives between 70 and 95% revenues from a single business, but it pursues at least one other business activity. The dominant business shares competencies in product, services, technologies, or distribution. For example, Harley-Davidson is primarily a motorcycle manufacturer. It derives some 10% of its annual revenues from Harley-Davidson branded motorcycle clothing and attire, as well as from licensing its brand. So, a firm follows a related diversification strategy when it derives less than 70% of its revenue from a single business activity and obtains revenue from other business lines linked to the primary business activity. So, as shown in Exhibit 8.7, the rationale behind related diversification is to benefit from economies of scale and scope. So, these multi-business firms can pool and share resources as well as leverage competencies across different business lines. For example, the ExxonMobil's strategic move into a natural gas is an example of related diversification. So, in 2009, ExxonMobil bought XTO Energy. So, XTO Energy is a natural gas company. They buy it for $31 billion. So, XTO Energy is known for its core competency to extract natural gas from unconventional places such as shale rock, the type of deposits currently being exploited in the United States. So, ExxonMobil hopes to leverage its core competencies in the exploration and commercialization of oil into a natural gas extraction. So, the company is producing nearly equal amount of crude and oil natural gas, making it the world's largest producer of natural gas. So, the company believes that roughly 50% of the world's energy for the next 50 years will continue to come from fossil fuels, but that its diversification into natural gas, the cleanest of the fossil fuels in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, will pay off. So, ExxonMobil's strategic scenario may be right on the mark because of the major technological advances of hydraulic fracking to extract oil and natural gas from shale rock by companies such as XTO Energy. The United States has emerged as the world's richest country in natural resources and the third largest producer of crude oil, just behind Saudi Arabia and Russia. So when executives consider business opportunities only where they can leverage their existing competencies and resources, the firm is using related constraint diversification. So the choices of alternative business activities are limited and constrained by the fact that they need to be related through common resources, capabilities, and competencies. So ExxonMobil's diversification move into natural gas is an example of related constrained diversification. But if executives consider new business activities that share only a limited number of linkages, the firm is using related link diversification. For example, Amazon began business by selling only one product, which is books. Over time, it expanded into CDs and later gradually leveraged it into online retailing capabilities into a wide array of product offerings. As the world's largest online retailer and given the need of build huge data centers to service its peak holiday demand, so Amazon decided to leverage spare capacity into cloud computing, again benefiting from economies of scope and scale. Amazon now also offers its Kindle line of tablet, computers, and proprietary content, as well as instant video streaming via its Prime service. Amazon follows a related link diversification strategy. Leveraging core competencies, corporate diversification. So first, let's define core competencies. Core competencies are unique strengths embedded deep within a firm. They allow companies to increase the perceived value of their product and services offering and or lower the cost to produce them. So example of core competencies are Walmart's ability to effectively orchestrate a globally distributed supply chain at a low cost. Second is Infosys' ability to provide high quality information technology services at a low cost by leveraging its global delivery model. This implies taking work to the local location where it makes the best economic sense based on the available talent and the least amount acceptable risk and lowest cost. So when applying an existing or new dimension to core competencies and markets, 4 quadrants emerge as shown in Exhibit 8.8. First, the lower left quadrant combines existing core competencies with existing markets. So here, managers need to come up with ideas of how to leverage existing core competencies to improve their current market position. Second, the lower right quadrant combines existing core competencies with new market opportunities. Here, managers need to think about how to redeploy and recombine existing core competencies to compete in future markets. So third, the upper left quadrant combines new core competencies with existing market opportunities. Here, manager must come up with the strategic initiatives of how to build new core competencies to protect and extend the firm's current market position. Fourth, the upper right quadrant combines new core competencies with new market opportunities. This is likely the most challenging diversification strategy because it requires rebuilding new core competencies and compete in future markets. So, the core competence market matrix provide guidance to executive how to diversify in order to achieve continued growth. Once managers have a clear understanding of the firm's core competencies, they have four options to formulate corporate strategy. First, leveraging existing core competencies to improve current market position. Second, build new core competencies to protect and extend current market position. Third, redeploy and recombine existing core competencies to compete in market of the future. Fourth, build new core competencies to create and compete in markets of the future. Corporate diversification and firm performance. First, corporate managers pursue diversification to gain and sustain competitive advantage. So there is the diversification discount and diversification premium. First, diversification discount is the situation in which the stock price of highly diversified firms is valued at less than the sum of their individual business units. Second, the diversification premium is the situation in which the stock price of related diversification firms is valued greater than the sum of their individual business units. So, the diversification performance relationship is a function of the underlying type of diversification. A cumulative body of research indicates an inverted U-shaped relationship between the type of diversification and overall firm performance. So, as shown in Exhibit 8.9, high and low levels of diversifications are generally associated with higher firm performance. This implies that companies that focus on a single business as well as companies that pursue unrelated diversification often fail to achieve additional value creation. Firms that compete in single markets could potentially benefit from economies of scope by leveraging their core competencies into adjacent markets. Firms that pursue unrelated diversification are often unable to create additional value. So, at the most basic level, a corporate diversification strategy enhances firm performance when its value creation is greater than the cost it incurs. So, Exhibit 8.10 lists the sources of value creation and cost for different corporate strategies for vertical integration as well as related and unrelated diversification. For diversification to enhance firm performance, it must do at least one of the following. First, provide economies of scale which reduces cost. Second, exploit economies of scope which increases value. Third, reduce cost and increase value. So, these drivers of competitive advantage, economies of scale, economies of scope, and increase in value and reduction of cost in relation to business strategy. So, in addition to these criteria, firms may enhance their performance when following a diversification strategy by benefiting from financial economies including restructuring and using internal capital markets. So, restructuring describes the process of reorganizing and divesting business units and activities to refocus a company in order to leverage its core competencies more fully. So, using internal capital markets. So, internal capital markets can be a source of value creation in a diversification strategy if the conglomerate's headquarters does a more efficient job of allocating capital through its budgeting process than what could be achieved in external capital markets. So, based on private information, corporate managers are in position to discover which of the strategic business units will provide the largest return on business capital. So, internal capital markets may allow company to access capital at a lower cost. So, corporate executives can restructure the portfolio of their firm's business much like an investor can change a portfolio of stocks. One helpful tool to provide corporate portfolio planning is the BCG, or the Boston Consulting Group Growth Share Matrix, shown in Exhibit 8.11. So the Boston Consulting Group Growth Share Matrix is a corporate planning tool in which the corporation is viewed as a portfolio of business units, which are presented graphically along relative market share horizontal axis and the speed of market growth, which is the vertical axis. So the SBUs are plotted into four categories: the dog, the cash cow, the star, and the question mark. Each warrants of different investment strategy. So the matrix locates the firm's individuals SBUs in two dimensions: the relative market share, the horizontal axis, and the speed of market growth, which is the vertical axis. So, all four categories shape the firm's corporate strategies. Recommendations are either to divest the business or to harvest it. So, this implies stopping investment in the business and squeezing out as much cash flow as possible before shutting it down or selling it. So, the cash cows in constant are SBUs that compete in a low growth market but hold considerable market share. So their earnings and cash flows are high and stable. The strategic recommendation is to invest enough into cash cows to hold their current position and to avoid having them turn into dogs as indicated by the arrows. So a corporation star SBUs hold a high market share in a fast-growing market. Their earnings are high and either stable or growing. The recommendation for the corporate strategies is to invest sufficient resources to hold the star's position or even increase investments for future growth. As indicated by the arrow, stars may turn into cash cows as the market in which the SBU is situated slows down due to reaching the maturity stage of the industry life cycle. So last one is the SBUs are question marks. It is not clear whether they will turn into dogs or stars. The earnings are low and unstable, but they might be growing. The cash flow, however, is negative. Ideally, corporate executives want to invest in a question mark to increase their relative market share so they turn into stars. If market conditions change, however, or the overall market growth slows down, then a question mark is likely to turn into a dog. In this case, executives would want to harvest the cash flow or divest the SBU.
Implications for the strategies. An effective corporate strategy increases a firm's chances to gain and sustain a competitive advantage. By formulating corporative strategy, executives make important choices along three dimensions that determine the boundaries of the firm. The degree of vertical integration, in what stage of the industry value chain to participate. The type of diversification, what range of product and services to offer. The geographic scope, where to compete. As an executive, you will have the opportunity to proactively shape the company corporate strategy in order to take advantage of external opportunities and mitigate threats. As discussed in Chapter Case 8, Jeffrey Immelt formulated a new corporative business opportunities in clean tech and healthcare, while reducing the exposure to global financial markets. Corporate strategy needs to be dynamic over time. As firms grow, they tend to diversify and globalize to capture additional growth opportunities. Exhibit 8.12 shows the dynamic nature of corporate strategies through decisions made by two top competitors in the sport, footwear, and apparel industry, Nike and Adidas. Adidas was founded in 1924. In Germany, it began its life in the laundry room of a small apartment. Two brothers focused on one product, athletic shoes, initially Adidas was a fairly integrated manufacturer of athletic shoes. The big breakthrough for the company came in 1954 when the underdog West Germany won the Soccer World Cup in Adidas cleats. As the world markets globalized and become more competitive in the decades after World War II, Adidas not only vertically disintegrated to focus mainly on the design of athletic shoes but also diversified into sports apparel. By 2013, Adidas was a diversified company active across the global in sports shoes, 40% of revenue. Sports apparel has 50% revenue. In sports equipment, 10% of revenues. The change in Adidas' corporate strategy from a small, highly integrated single business to a disintegrated and diversified global company is showed in Exhibit 8.12.